Hello, my name is Althea Learson, the CEO of Leadership Buffalo. I'm here to welcome you to our new podcast, Connections. We'd like to thank Lawley Insurance for sponsoring this series for us. At Leadership Buffalo, we are on a mission to connect people and inspire change. Each month, we will connect with the people that make our community the vibrant, resilient, and beautiful region we call home. Along the way, we'll be having candid and sometimes challenging discussions and stepping outside of our comfort zones in the hope that we can grow alongside our city. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy.
In this episode, we wanted to celebrate Women's History Month, so we sat down with Sherry Scavone, a Leadership Buffalo graduate of the class of 2015 and the executive director of the Western New York Women's Foundation. We hope you enjoy.
Hi, Sherry. It's good to see you.
Good morning.
So thank you for doing this with us. We have a couple questions given that this is Women's History Month. Please share your background and how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. That seems to be a common question. So I actually had the honor of starting out my career as a physical therapist. I was brought up in a family where I was exposed to a lot of different medical aspects of care and of caring for people. And I love physical therapy. I think the ability to spend time with people and to understand people, and then of course to fix things. So I became a fixer and had opportunities open to advance my career in health administration and did some administrative work and spent a lot of time in a for-profit business locally in Western New York, and then continued in nonprofit work within my profession of physical therapy and within my community and my church. A door opened, and I try to always walk through any door to try out public service. And I ran the New York State Cancer Program, which is the largest cancer screening program, public health program in the nation. So that was a real eye-opener for me, and an incredible learning experience about public health, about health disparities, and about epidemiology and how important data is in driving all of our work. And that led me back to nonprofit. I love nonprofit work. I think it's where things happen. We can affect change much more quickly than in public health and public service, for sure. And so I landed at the Western New York Women's Foundation.
That's great. And that's where I met you when you were running the epidemiology when
Yes.
you were in that field. Yeah,
Yes.
That's right. Many, many years ago.
Yes.
So along that journey, your professional journey, what obstacles did you face as a woman?
I think sometimes you see obstacles and sometimes you don't. And the rearview mirror, I think, is probably stronger for me. Certainly at the beginning of my career, particularly in nonprofit work and then in for-profit, I was most often the only woman in the room. I'm not sure I saw that as something that was unusual. I actually had some really strong male mentors in physical therapy who continue to be mentors to this day, and I'm so indebted to them for lifting me up, for giving me the opportunities. But certainly, I recognize now, the less opportunities, the pay inequities, and certainly just the power struggle, if you will, that in those inequities that men held as opposed to me as a woman in that room.
So as someone who started working in the professional world in the 1970s, I'm really dating myself here. I see a lot of changes, but I haven't seen enough changes. So talk a little bit about how you feel the landscape has changed for women over the course of your career.
Yeah, I would have said pre-COVID that I thought we were making some strides, that we advocated, we have a strong advocacy arm at the Western New York Women's Foundation. We advocated for paid family leave. And one of the reasons we did that is because when you look at other countries that had paid family leave, where paternity leave was part of the opportunity for men to engage in early caretaking, it really changed the narrative. It changed the landscape for families. It changed that caretaking role that is 90% of the time assumed by women, right? Whether you call it unpaid labor, whether you call it caretaking. It's all of that second job that happens outside of your paid work during the day. And, so we were starting to see some shift. COVID, as you know, derailed women, and particularly derailed women of color, where 2 million women dropped out of the workforce to stay home and care for their children. And they did so because they were paid lower. So in a family, when you make that decision, in a family where there's a partnership, certainly single women had even greater challenges. And I think now women are trying to figure out, what is that balance, right, of getting back into the workforce. We know when women step out of the workforce, they go back, they earn less than men do actually when they have children. There's this mommy penalty of, perception that women are capable of less after they have children for some reason. And so I think we've actually slid backwards some, in part because I think women are standing up and saying, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. And in part because, it threw so many things off. And we know that women remain out of the workforce in some pretty significant numbers.
Yeah, it's alarming, to hear those trends. Yeah. So Sherry, talk a little bit about work-life balance. I know you're a single mom of twins. And you balance a lot. You have a pretty big job and a lot of responsibility in the community with board work and board service. Tell us a little bit, how do you find work-life balance and how that's important for females?
Well, it is really important, and I am encouraging it more and more. I think it took me a really long time, and quite frankly, it took a fairly catastrophic, sudden passing of my mother recently to really wake me up to the fact that life is really short, and you have to figure out that balance somehow. For me, it's time alone. It's getting on my bike. It's getting in my kayak. It's being religious about my time with yoga, with a certain class, each week. And if I can't make it, such as last week and this week, they send me the recording, and I try to do it. So I think you have to be very, very purposeful. And I also think we have to be more vocal to say, you know what, I'm not doing this. I can't do this. I started my career as a fixer. I always thought I had to fix everything and do everything. And I think so many women, that's how they function. I think we need to cut ourselves some slack. It's just not realistic. It's not healthy. We know that women's health is suffering, across the board. And we have to take care of ourselves. I always use that airplane adage of, put your mask on first before you can help others. And I think that really has to sink in. But when you make choices about, do I work or do I spend time, with an ailing parent? Do I work or do I go for a walk with my child? I think our priorities, again, because of COVID, have shifted some. Everything changed so quickly. And so we really had to rethink that balance. And it's not a balance, it's a juggle. I always say it's a juggle. There's no such thing as a balance. So, I encourage women to juggle, but to also prioritize themselves.
Yeah, and I do think COVID made a big difference and shift in that, where we are realizing that we need some time to look out for ourselves. And do you think that as women, we felt like we had to do it all? We had to, because we always had to work harder to achieve the same level of success. We had to do a little bit more to be able to keep up with our male counterparts. So do you think that is a lot of why women feel that they have to do everything?
Yeah, I mean, it's that cultural, pressure, right? And I think, particularly if you center the voices of our Black and Brown sisters, they not only have to do everything, but they have to be so conscious of how they show up and who they are. And I think as women in general, we do that. And so, some of that is a cultural shift. Some of that is companies saying, it's okay to flex this. It's okay, just thinking differently, right? The idea of flex schedules or remote work or, any of the things that we're seeing happening as a result of COVID, no one would have considered that. As I drove this morning into Buffalo, I mean, what would have been bumper to bumper, pre-COVID is now wide open, streets. So that tells you something. And I think that benefits women in their juggling and their ability to be flexible so that they can do more, not do it all, but to do more.
You may bring up a good point. I was never a fan of, working from home, and I love working from home. And my team here is able to have the ability to flex their schedule. And we have a couple moms in the organization too. And I think it's important. I have heard companies who are making people be in the office and they refuse to let them work at home. I always think that that's a mistake. So what's your thought on that, to not give people, whether it's male or female, give people that flexibility to be able to
Yeah, I think there's some jobs, obviously, that's impossible. And, again, 89% of workers in service industries are women. And we really have to give a shout out to them. And again, particularly our Black and Brown sisters on whose backs we rode through the pandemic. And, when you look at caretaking, when you look at those positions that don't have that luxury, those are the women and the families I really worry about. I think companies have to come to the table being willing to do things differently if they're going to retain staff, and particularly women. That includes, considerations around childcare and on-site. That includes, other opportunities for benefits. That includes pushing paternity leave as they do maternity leave, because again, that begins to equalize some things. So I think companies have to think differently than in the past.
Let's talk a little bit about the work that you do at the Western New York Women's Foundation, which is significant. I'm really trying to affect change. Tell me a little bit about, what is your organization doing to try to elevate women in leadership roles and in the workplace?
Sure. So we focus on 4 primary areas. One is giving voice to the issues. So we are data driven. We have a new knowledge management coordinator who is amazing in pulling data together to tell a story. Whether it's the probability of a woman being able to earn a living wage in Western New York, which is about 7% for a single Black mother, whether it's any of the other data that we can use to tell the story. So giving voice to that, and it's opportunities like this, it's media exposure, it's lifting and elevating the issues that are really impacting women to, as we say, change minds and hearts, to help people look at things differently, including employers and businesses and leaders and stakeholders. We also have a really strong advocacy arm. So we have relationships and are in Albany and sit in positions of power, if you will, and influence to advance policy and funding to benefit this region. So as an example, we brought facilitated enrollment childcare subsidy to Western New York in 2016. And so far we've elevated about $4.5 million for working families that don't qualify for the regular childcare subsidy. Now, at the same time, we've been working on transformational changes for the childcare system to make that something that is accessible and affordable for parents, and a good business model for the mostly women and mostly minority women businesses that are providing this really essential care to our employees around the area. And then our other 2 focus areas, which the voice and the advocacy play into, but we have specific initiatives for advancing women into positions of leadership. So both at a corporate level, we work with businesses to try to achieve a certain number of metrics to change their culture, to help their business be a better place for women to grow and to learn and to lead. We know when women lead, they do things that affect other women in a positive way. And then we work with individual aspiring leaders and also try to elevate entrepreneurs, who are a significant and growing number of women leaders in our community. And we work with some other organizations and try to really collaborate with other pieces to elevate women in elected office and other areas that women can lead and that we need women leading. And then our other focus area is women's economic empowerment. And we primarily focus there on giving women and single mothers the opportunity for training and education with considerable supports that will help elevate them to a living wage. Again, the statistic of in the city of Buffalo, 54% of our families living in poverty are single mother head of household. And then when you layer on that probability of them ever earning a living wage, if they don't have more than a high school degree, being somewhere around 7%, that paints a really, really sad story. And so if we can provide the supports, if we can center the women and acknowledge the trauma and the realities and the barriers, the very real barriers, including the implicit biases in employers, and we can elevate their skill set, their training, their education, and then work with the companies to provide employment that is supportive and understanding, then we begin to change what poverty looks like in Buffalo and economic mobility for women. So all of our focus is around elevating women in this region so they can learn, earn, lead, and thrive, because we know that when women thrive, families thrive, and our region thrives. So it really is all about our economic growth in this region happening on the backs of women who, for too often, have been left behind.
Right. I love the way your organization also works with so many different organizations in the community on collaboration. It's really important. I know you work with SUNY Erie on the Moms program, and I know you're working with some other organizations as well. So I think that's great to have us all work together and pull them up. Tell me a little bit about your personal thoughts on why do you think it's important to have women in leadership roles?
Yeah, women, I think it's important to have diversity in leadership roles, right? Because everyone brings a different voice to the table. Everyone brings a different lived experience to the table. And so, when you have, and I'll call out our Buffalo Common Council, it may be 8 really nice guys, but it's 8 guys. And they themselves have said to me, we've never talked about childcare before. I wonder why. So, I think what we're trying to do is diversify the voice so you get a real picture. If you haven't sat and listened to women of color and their daily challenges as they go about their work and try to contribute to this, this community, then you can't even begin, and you can't understand it anyways, but, just to at least understand and acknowledge and amplify. If you haven't been a single mother, if you haven't been a woman trying to juggle the caretaking roles and the after-school schedule and the childcare that has to close because we don't pay our childcare workers enough and they lose staff, then you're looking through half a lens. And I think for this region to thrive, for any region to thrive, we have to have our eyes wide open. And that view has to be inclusive of the many, many, many lived experiences in this community.
It's amazing to me how, even with all the progress we have made, 2 things that the burden of the child care still falls 75% on the woman, whether it's a 2-parent family, and also wage inequality. I did my master's thesis on wage inequality. Oh my gosh, so many years ago, and it still hasn't reached equality, and it's very sad to see that. What work is the Western York Women's Foundation doing as far as the trying to increase and level out the wages?
Yeah, a lot of it is right now we're doing a deep dive into research and producing data summaries and fact sheets that again try to lift the issue. We are working with specific groups, certainly our employer partners. So we had a number of employer partners in Cohort 1 for All In, which is our Advancing Women in Leadership initiative. We had 6 in Cohort 2 and 5 in Cohort 3, and working together with them on very specific metrics, including really taking a deep dive into what their salaries look like and their benefits, the overall compensation package, and the equality and equity of that. We also are working specifically with some different institutions. I won't name them at this point, but one of the things that we've seen, which is really astonishing in the wage gap, is that as salary and education increases, women actually earn less and less and less. So we know at the service level, right, men earn about $200 a week more than women. But when you start going up, and New York will just put out a statistic that it's white women earn 82 cents to every dollar that a white non-Hispanic male makes. It is less for Black women and substantially less than for Hispanic, Asian, and Indian. But when you start going up, real estate, finance, medicine, women with MBAs, women with MDs, women with law degrees, which is the majority now in the schools, right? So women are now the majority in medical school and law school. They earn substantially less, and women earn less than their male counterparts as they age. So once you hit age 45, women's income actually begins to regress, where men's continues to elevate. I think the highest point for men is somewhere around 55, 60. So you have to ask yourself, like, why, right? And for me, it's, what are we leaving on the table, right? From an economic standpoint, what are we leaving on the table from a potential standpoint for this community? By not fully engaging all of our genders and our gender minorities, women, and why? Why would we have inequities? Why, if you're a local hospital, why wouldn't you pay your doctors the same, right? Based on experience, based on education, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So I think we this summer the salary transparency bill will go into effect. There was a salary ban. You can't ask history. All of those things are purported to begin to help women from a wage inequity perspective. But the bottom line is, leaders need to stand up and say, this isn't okay, and we're going to do pay audits. I just read Ursula Burns, the former Xerox CEO, her book, and that was something they routinely did every year. And she said, I never would have thought that we would see any inequities, but we still did when we did our annual audits, and so then we corrected it. And we didn't let it, happen again. So, it starts at the top by people saying this isn't okay. There's no reason for this. You cannot, other than bias, you cannot, come up with any justification. And so we're going to do something to try to level that playing field.
That's outstanding. It's very scary to me to hear that this is still the case, because those are all the same statistics that were in my master's thesis 20 years ago. And the price of eggs has gone up faster than the wages, and especially lately. There's a great book called When Everything Changed by Gail Collins, and it's a look of 50 years of history of women in the workplace, especially our Black and brown sisters. And it's an outstanding book that really will make you angry as a female, to really get to understand what has been taking place and what is still not yet done. Yeah. So another question for you, Sherry. The work you're doing is outstanding, and it's so well needed, and it's so we're grateful to have your organization and people like you doing this. Where do you see things being in 5-10 years from now, or what's your vision you'd like to see?
Again, I think COVID was seismic, right? It was a seismic shift for all of us in our thinking and our prioritization and how we functioned. Unfortunately, I would have liked to seen us come out the other side where we really did change, where we really did make decisions based on priorities as opposed to kind of what we've known, right, for history back to the 70s in your paper. So I certainly personally would like to think that when I retire in 5 or 10 or 15 years, that we have moved that needle, that the Buffalo Common Council is half women, that the Power 250 is 50% women, that pay equity is a non-issue, right? That we've put systems and policies and practices in place to make that a non-issue. And certainly, sooner than that, we have to enact universal childcare in this community, in this state. I'm honored to again serve on the New York State Child Care Availability Task Force, where we are charged with figuring that out by year end. We just met for the first time last week, so it's an abbreviated schedule. But we have to figure out a solution. We have to lead. The state has to lead in recognizing that childcare is an essential workforce support. And if we don't put that in place, that women are never going to be able to elevate. Women make decisions on their careers and on their jobs because of, around childcare schedules, around availability of childcare. And pre-K 3 and 4 is not an answer. Again, those are part-time programs. They're siphoning off from the childcare centers. Like, there's a lot of wrong in the system. And in some ways, as during COVID, we have to be willing to throw out some of the regulations that are holding us back in so many ways. And again, laws and policies and practices, and really think very differently. So, in 10 years, I would certainly hope that we weren't having this conversation, right? That your thesis from 1970 is a prehistoric document, and we're not talking about it anymore. It shouldn't be. It leaves too much on the table.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. Do you have any statistics, Sherry, on how many households are both working parents or working partners?
Yeah, I did during COVID, and it's significant. It's I want to say it's well above 50%. We're both, but I think in some cases there was a statistic for the number of kids under 4 with both working parents, and I want to say it was like 68% or something like that. So it's really significant. And the cost of eggs, right? It's really hard for a family to live on one income. So again, you can imagine the many families in our community that are single parent, households, and how did they ever make it? We know from our work with our economic mobility and our programs with our women's economic mobility pathway that women are coming in every day because, again, when they start earning money, they are thrown off all public benefits, which is one of our policy areas. And so we had a woman yesterday who is working full-time in the program that she was trained to be in, and she came in for food because she'd lost her SNAP benefits. And so, it's again, if you haven't been there, you can't understand the moms who come in and say, can I have 3 oatmeal packets so I can feed my kids dinner tonight? Like, that just shouldn't be in this country, in this state, in this world. And so I look at how much waste there is. And again, it comes back to priorities. Where are we putting our money? Where are we putting our time? And I think, that's you and me in our personal lives and our juggling balance. I think that's our organizations and reprioritizing what we're looking at. And I think it certainly is our government's, a real need to look and say, where are we putting our priorities? What matters here? And, when you look at, for example, childcare, we've already shown the return on investment for childcare is like 18-1. Like, you can't invest anywhere, right, and get that kind of return on investment. And yet we don't do it.
It's almost like the laws are still back in the 70s, if you will, and we have progressed, and the laws haven't changed with us.
Yeah, and I might say that I think that is largely because of the lack of women's voice in those positions, right? As you start to see in Western New York and across the state, we have an increasing number of women in elected office. And I will tell you, it changes the narrative. It really changes that conversation. And I think that's why we've been successful the last few years in elevating the childcare discussion. But things remain the same unless there's an impetus to change, and that change has to be the voice. And it has to be the grassroots voice, right? We have to empower women to have a voice at every level.
It's like having people like you doing the work that you're doing, so we need more of that. So to wrap up, let me ask you, who is the woman that you admire the most, nationally, globally, and also locally?
That's a really tough question. I think every woman contributes, and certainly, to me personally, and to our community. I think it's the women who you don't see in the Power 250, right? It's the women who are quietly using their influence to make connections, to push policy, to influence change, and I wouldn't call out anyone specifically around that, but I think it's really important for us to recognize that there's a lot of that happening, whether it's you or me meeting quietly at a coffee shop, helping, an organization to stay afloat or to connect them to another organization or to expand a program or to convince someone to advance policy regardless of what side of the table they're on. There is a lot of that happening behind the scenes. And I think that's super important. Historically, I think Eleanor Roosevelt was, as I always like to say, one amazing before her time kick-ass woman. And since then, I think we've continued to have some real leaders who are willing to use their voice to affect change.
Yes, and I think you're one of them, Sherry. So
thank you.
Yes.
As you.
I'd like to see us get rid of that Power Women list and just have one list.
Yep.
That's people.
250.
Yeah, just
125 women, 125 men. That
You
would
couldn't
go a
agree
long
with
ways.
you more.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, and also for the great work that you're doing to advocate for women in our community and also around the entire state. So,
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today for this conversation, and make sure you come back next month as we talk about volunteerism. Thank you to our sponsors over at Lolly Insurance for making this podcast happen, and if you want to find out more about how you can change the world around you, one connection at a time, find us online at leadershipbuffalo.org.